So next we're going to hear from Mark Carrigan. Mark is a digital fellow at the Sociological Review and has recently completed 3 years as a research fellow in the Center for Social Ontology at the University of Warwick. He is an assistant editor of Big Data and Society, associate social media editor of the International Journal of Social Research Methodology, and a founding member of the editorial boards of Discover Society and the Journal of Applied Social Theory. Among many other accomplishments, he is also the author of Social Media for Academics. And with that, Mark, if you're ready, please begin.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here today. My plan today is to give a broad overview of social media for academics, with the intention of helping you all formulate an engagement strategy that's right for you and can be integrated into your working life in a sustainable way. And I think increasingly it's become impossible for researchers to ignore social media, or at least it's becoming impossible, much as it's becoming impossible for us to ignore it as citizens. And in only a matter of years, it's become something ubiquitous in our lives. These on the slide are estimates of social media use across a range of platforms in a single day, and invocations of the size and scale of social media are quite familiar now. But I think it can be useful when we start addressing this topic to take a look at these and think about the amount of activity that this represents and what that means for society and what that means for our role as scholars in society. And these things have developed in such a short space of time. It can be arresting to stop and remember how recent these companies are. The oldest of them is still a little over a decade old. Even amongst the newer ones, there are some that have millions of users and are hugely influential, in spite of, as is the case with Snapchat, for instance, being started only 6 years ago. Of course, this all raises the question of what do we mean by social media? What is it? And these questions are ones which we ask very regularly. And it's a very slippery term in the sense that we all know roughly what we mean when we talk about social media, and yet there's a lack of precision about how it's defined, because in a literal sense, all media are social in that they facilitate communication between people. And if we look in the academia, we can see things like email and mailing lists, which are surely examples of social media in this broad sense. And they've been used by academics for decades, and yet discussions of social media rarely take account of these. And this, I think, is why it's helpful to not get too hung up on definitions. It can be a useful place to start, but we should be, we shouldn't feel too stressed about what we define as social media and what we don't define. And when I do workshops on these topics, I often get asked questions about is so-and-so social media. And I think for purposes of thinking through what role this technology could play in academic life, we should just think very broadly about what social media is, and instead focus on what we can do with it. Because the everyday use of the term social media is in some senses quite straightforward. It usually refers to a particular generation of internet platforms. Software, essentially, running through a web browser or mobile applications, many of which were previously described in terms of the notion of Web 2.0. And these are designed to facilitate the making and sharing of content and the development of networks between users. And there were early examples of these. Some of the prominent ones include Friendster, Bebo, MySpace. But social media really came to life with mobile phones, tablet computers, and mobile internet. And we're talking about social media because these platforms, as well as the technologies they depend upon, have become a ubiquitous part of most of our lives. The political scientist Gary King describes this as the largest increase in the expressive capacity of humanity in the history of the world. Because, as he puts it, any one person can now write a post which at least has the potential to be read by billions of others. And in one sense, I think he's absolutely correct here. This is a huge expansion in human expression and interaction. And it's accessible through mostly free, mostly easy-to-use tools. And it's very exciting that millions of people are using these platforms. But it's also very challenging precisely because millions of people are using these platforms. It was once difficult to publish your thoughts. It was once difficult to make your thoughts public, to return to the root of the word publishing. And for this reason, there were complex filters in place. It was a costly undertaking to publish, and because of that, we had an excess of controls over who was allowed to make their thoughts public, under what circumstances. And it's now easy and, crucially, immediate to get your thoughts out there. And this is why we have a different challenge. The challenge is to ensure that you're discovered. And this is a much trickier business. And the data that I presented here are screenshots from a website called the Internet Live Stats. I'd really strongly recommend looking at it because the animated dynamic site conveys the rhythm of these increases in the way a static screenshot doesn't. I've often found it slightly hypnotic, particularly when I'm using estimates from the Internet Live Stats in my writing, because I find that when I copy and paste them into a word processor, in the few seconds it takes me to switch my attention from one window to another, the scale of the increase in that small window of time is astonishing. And the Internet Live Stats convey the speed at which this activity is accumulating throughout the day and the rhythms of its unfolding. And I find this aesthetically interesting, but I'm not talking about it today for that reason. I think it's useful because it illustrates what I see as the three main challenges which academics face when trying to use social media. The first is how to be heard above the din of hundreds of millions of people. Secondly, how to keep up when social media moves so fast. And thirdly, how to know where to spend your time when social media itself changes so rapidly. Because as we will have seen when we observe the landscape of social media platforms come into being, they change, and sometimes they die off. And this makes it hard to know which one to spend your time on. Do you try and have a presence on everything, creating the risk that you don't have a significant presence on anything? Do you focus on a particular platform, pouring your energy into it, but risking that it might go the way of MySpace? Or do you pursue a strategy in between the two, which I think is what most people do? And perhaps frustratingly, there are no right and wrong answers to these questions. For one thing, they're very new questions. And they're ultimately ones which I think you have to decide for yourself. And by the end of the presentation today, I hope I will have helped you be confident in thinking through these questions in a systematic and practical way. And hopefully I'll help you develop workable strategies and techniques to decide what to use, how to use it, and when to use it in a way that can make it a sustainable part of your professional life. And I think sustainability is key here. How to make it part of your routines, how to make it part of your habits, how to avoid it just being another item on a to-do list that's probably already a bit too long for comfort. And the more social media can become how you enact your scholarship, how you do your scholarship, it can become part of your daily activities. The more effectively you'll use it, the more sustainably you'll use it, and the more enjoyable the use will be. And the key thing I want to convey is that so much of this depends on being clear about why you want to use social media. If you can be clear about why you want to use it, the question of how to use it and for what purpose will become much more straightforward. There is undoubtedly a learning curve for any of these platforms, but I would also argue it's rarely an onerous one. And the tendency of our discussions about social media in higher education to focus on how to use Twitter, how to use YouTube, how to blog, often gets in the way of the more important and more interesting questions about what these technologies mean for our lives as scholars. What do they mean for the practice of scholarship? How can we use them effectively as committed scholars? And it can be hard to have these conversations if we see social media as a singular thing to which all researchers must adapt or be left behind. And unfortunately, debates about social media in the university often proceed on this level as arguments about why academics as a whole should or shouldn't use social media as a whole. And in reality, academics are a diverse group in terms of things like career stage, discipline, field, gender, ethnicity, age. These are all factors that could potentially shape how you approach using social media. And so it's helpful if we move beyond seeing social media as a whole category and talking about academics as such, and instead try and focus ourselves on particular social media platforms which can be used for particular activities. And to give some examples from my own experience, I use my blog to record my notes when I engage with scholarly literature. It helps categorize and file away notes in a way which is immensely useful when I'm later writing, particularly if I'm away from my office. It helps me draw out connections between different pieces of work and search through what I've done in ways which are often surprising. The fact people see it ensures that I make an effort to articulate my ideas properly. And this was brought home to me recently when I found myself looking through my old paper notebooks I used as a PhD student, and found that I wrote in a shorthand, and I wrote in a slightly indecipherable shorthand. And at risk of stating the obvious, when you're using a blog, the fact you're typing your words longhand and they'll be read by others makes it easy to ensure that the notes will be accessible to you as well at a later stage. It gives you that added push to articulate your thoughts at length. And secondly, I use Twitter to promote events I organise. I've made an effort to connect with as many people as possible within the areas I work on. And this means that Twitter in particular can be an incredibly powerful tool for disseminating information about these events. I've organised a lot of events, I did throughout my PhD as well. And before social media, it used to involve endless emails to mailing lists in academic departments and endless posters printed without any clear sense of whether they were working or not, but simply because it felt like something you had to do because it was so difficult to raise awareness of events. And social media has transformed the experience of event organising for me. As a third example, I use podcasts to have informal dialogues with people whose work I find interesting. These have enriched my thinking and helped me build relationships with potential collaborators. I've been doing this since I was a PhD student. I found it consistently to be a way that people enjoy interacting and appreciate the final product. It's pretty unique in its capacity to get you acquainted with someone as a person and a researcher in a short space of time. And these are just a few examples, but I could list many more. And I hope in the discussion later, we can hear from some people who've already found social media useful about how it benefits them. And my point is that we should try as hard as we can to relate to this on the level of scholarly activities and interests. Things like building our networks, ensuring people read our publications, managing literature and sources, engaging with publics outside the academy, and generating an impact through our research. And if we can become concrete in this way, it makes it easier to think things through. And ultimately, social media won't be right for everything or for everyone. But if we approach social media and its opportunities in this concrete way, it becomes a lot easier to determine what's right for us and when it's going to be right for us, and to think about how social media can be integrated into our working lives. There are so many social media platforms, though, that it can be hard to know where to start. Some of these are very familiar. Things like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Others probably much less so. There are also new ones constantly being launched, as well as existing ones falling out of view after they failed to make much of a mark. And internet scholars have spent a lot of time debating how to define social media and how to categorize social media platforms. What I'm offering here is not intended on that level, as much as it's just a useful way, I hope, of trying to think through the basic opportunities. And at risk of being overly reductive, I'm trying to make 4 key points. If you're interested in publishing writing, use a blogging platform. If you're interested in publishing images, audio, or video, use a multimedia platform. If you're interested in organizing material you find online, use a discovery or curation platform. And if you're interested in expanding your network, use a networking platform. Obviously, in reality, it's somewhat more complex than that. And there are also the question of how to link these different platforms together. But as a starting point, if you're unclear about what you want to try first, think about the kind of outputs you could imagine using. Are you producing things as part of your existing work that you could share? Are you going to make new things to share online? And then you could use a table like this to read back and find a platform to start experimenting with and go from there. And over time, you will want to try and link these together in a way that works for you. So, for example, my blog is the hub of my other social media activity. It's an inventory of what I do. It has links to all my social media platforms, and it ties my identity together. Meanwhile, I use my presence on Twitter to share things I post on my blog, so a wider professional network. And this is just one way to link them together, but hopefully it can give a sense of what the core options are in terms of social media platforms and how they can be tied together effectively. And we could have an extensive discussion about any one of these platforms, how to use it effectively, how to use it ineffectively, what are the key concerns, what are the key kinds of challenges you'll face when using it. And we'll have a bit of time for questions at the end, and hopefully things could be introduced in the discussion later. But my concern now is to give an overview of how to navigate this landscape and how to think about the process of approaching any one of these given platforms. And if you're really new to this and you want to know a place to start, one exercise that I found useful in the past is to identify a practical activity or ambition. For instance, do you want to communicate your research findings to policymakers? Do you want to convey your research questions in an engaging way to a group who participate in your research? Would you like to become more effective at identifying new developments in your field beyond the academic literature? Or do you want to ensure you're visible to a group who you want to do research with in the future? And once you have a sense of an ambition, once you have a sense of a project that social media might be useful for, it's a case of linking this up to a particular platform that might be helpful to you. So to go through those examples, if you're interested in communicating your research findings to policymakers, you could do this by writing a blog post, summarizing a journal article in accessible language, and offering it as a guest post to a group blog that has a relevant audience. For instance, something like the LSE's Politics and Policy blog. As a second example, if you're keen to convey your research questions in an engaging way to a group who participate in your research, then an ambitious but still achievable aim could be to produce a short film about your research which could be released on YouTube, expressing the key ideas and ambitions underlying it in a way that gets beyond the academic literature. If you're trying to become more effective at identifying new developments in your field beyond the academic literature, you could use a reader app, which I'll come on to in more depth later, something like Feedly, and follow a wide range of relevant websites and blogs, then ensuring that you read them regularly. And as a final example, if you want to ensure you're visible to a group you want to do research with in the future, you could find members of this group on Twitter, search for keywords and Twitter lists, or identifying relevant accounts in this area, and seeing who's already following them and follow them in turn. And this exercise I'm suggesting of getting started by defining a project where you link a particular ambition to a particular social media platform can seem artificial because obviously it is. But I think it can be a useful way of getting started because if you give yourself a concrete aim, it's easier to begin than as opposed to what a lot of people do, which is feeling that they want to start blogging or start tweeting. And for some people this does work. Some people find the easiest way to get started is to jump in and experiment. But this can also be quite difficult. It can make the activity aimless. And if you have a concrete aim, it can really orientate what you're doing and make it easier to see how this could be useful for you. And once you complete one of these little projects, you can think of others, and the process tends to spiral. But there are ways to be more strategic, obviously, and these require more forethought. In the next section of the presentation, I'm going to go through 4 sets of considerations: who your audience is, how you can connect with them, why they will be interested, and what resources you have. And if you think through these 4 sets of questions, then you will have a strategy for engaging with the particular groups, which can guide your activity as you go forward. And so firstly, I put public, by which I just mean sociological jargon for audience effectively. And I think the key thing here is to be clear about who they are. What do you know about them? And this can seem like the most obvious question in the world, but I think actually when we start to dwell on it, we can realize that there are gaps in our knowledge. We can realize that what we thought was a singular group, we actually know to be multiple groups. And at the start of any engagement strategy, to have a clear sense of who you're trying to engage with. Are you trying to engage with multiple groups? If so, what does this mean? Are there conflicting interests between those groups? Might you need to use very different styles of communication for them? And it can follow from this that you need to learn more about these groups. And if so, that raises the question of how you can learn more about them. Social media can be a really powerful means to do this in terms of following blogs, reading websites, watching YouTube videos, finding podcasts, following Twitter feeds. And this can facilitate a kind of ambient engagement where even if you're only intermittently reading it, it can help you learn about what people share, how they see the world, how they see their own life. And I think this can be something really useful as an actual research tool in its own right. And it can be a way of facilitating more direct forms of engagement where once you start to build online connections with people in these audiences, you can talk to people directly about these issues, ask questions, write blog posts that call for comments. And the flip side to this is, what can you learn from them, and what sort of relationship would that necessitate? And I think this is something that we often pay lip service to, but social media offers some really powerful opportunities to do this. And one example from my own experience is when I've done research with the asexual community. And I found social media to be an incredibly powerful means of learning about these groups that I was planning qualitative research with before I'd actually made contact with them. And you can learn about terminology, different cultural forms, different outlooks, different ideas. And it can be a very powerful tool for you as a researcher. And a third question here is, so if you want to engage with this audience, what do you want them to do? If you're trying to influence them in some way, if you think that through public engagement you can generate an impact from your research can make a difference in the world, it's important to render this concretely. What effect do you think is feasible? Why do you think that effect would happen? And a crucial subgroup in bringing about those kinds of effects is stakeholders or gatekeepers. How can you connect with them? And again, to be clear, if there are people who already control audiences, say people who run influential Twitter feeds, people who run podcasts on a particular theme, people who run blogs, which members of your audience, members of your hoped for audience engage with regularly, these gatekeepers can be very helpful in gaining connections with these audiences. But you need to be clear about why those gatekeepers would want to help you. Why would they be interested in what you're doing? And think of how to make contact with them on that basis. The second set of considerations is, how exactly can you connect with these people? And this follows from who they are. So if you have a clear sense of your audience now, do you know what platforms they use on social media? How do they communicate using them? Are these platforms suitable for connecting in a research capacity? So, this issue is a complex one, but it might be that people are using private Facebook groups or even relatively closed Facebook groups, which might not be straightforwardly appropriate for you to make contact with as a researcher, and it's important to be careful about traversing these sorts of boundaries. And to be clear about demographics as well can be helpful, and so we don't really have much time to cover that in the session today. But something like the Pew Internet Project has some wonderful data about the demographics using different social media platforms. And this can be a slightly broad brush approach for planning an engagement strategy. But for instance, if it's a particularly youthful group that you're trying to engage with, then the data we have about demographics suggests platforms like Instagram and Snapchat might be better than Twitter and Facebook. And when you're planning how to connect with people using social media, there are some really common myths that I think it's important to avoid. Firstly, we often assume that we're talking to the general public, that when we use a platform with millions of users, we are at least potentially being read by those users. Whereas in reality, who sees us and who engages with what we post depends on the decisions we make as we start to use a platform. It depends on who we follow and who follows us and how that plays out over time. And we need to be realistic about the fact that actually the way these platforms work means that, say, every tweet you post, every Facebook post you make, only your followers will potentially see that unless it's shared more widely, and only a fraction of those followers will see it in the first instance. Ultimately, not everyone sees everything, and to have realistic expectations of the communicative power of social media is, I think, a very important part of using it sustainably in the long term. If you believe that your research will immediately go viral, or the very fact of trying to make contact with these groups will immediately generate a vast plethora of connections, you're probably going to be disappointed. These are powerful tools, but still the world is a complex, overburdened place, and social media is a distracted environment. And so it can be hard to cut through the clutter. And you should be realistic about how much time and energy is required to build a sustained set of connections. It's also important when you're thinking about how to connect with a particular audience that platform demographics are key, as I've suggested, but also to think about geographical and occupational factors. So, at risk of stating the obvious, if you're trying to engage with a professional group who you know will not be using social media in a personal capacity at work, then it might not be the best idea to narrow all your engagement to during their working hours. If you're trying to engage with people in a particular geographical region, perhaps other than your own, it can be important to make sure that you're sending your tweets or sending your posts out at a time when those people are likely to be awake and engaged on social media. And it's also important to be sure that you don't fall into the trap of seeing online and offline as distinct spheres. I think one of the most powerful aspects of social media for engaging with particular audiences is when, as it were, online connections can supplement offline connections. What some people describe as ambient intimacy, the kind of almost osmotic accrual of background knowledge about people you're connected with online, as you just pick up little snippets about their days and their lives. This is something that can be really helpful in building connections, but exactly how it plays out is likely to be quite dependent on the particular project that you're engaged in. Thirdly, and this is perhaps the most difficult one in some ways, to be clear about why they will be interested. And I would suggest that academics, we often overestimate the intrinsic interest of our research. Even if what we're doing obviously relates to a particular group, it doesn't necessarily mean they will be interested. And I've seen lots of examples where people discover that not only is a group not interested, but actually for reasons that are a surprise. They might be skeptical, or they might even be outright hostile. You should think carefully about the possible range of ways in which your research will be interpreted. And if you go into these interactions in an overly enthusiastic way, without thinking about the fact that actually there might be a range of opinions within this audience about what you're doing, then there's a real possibility you might be disappointed. And the more careful you can be about thinking through these issues at the outset, the safer you'll be in terms of how they unfold. And underlying this is a problem that I find fascinating, which is distraction and the capacity of social media to distract people. Because people are busy, and this poses a really practical question of how you will catch their attention. How will you hold their attention? How will you build a connection? And the dangerous thing about this is that the very fact of this being a challenge means that all sorts of techniques have developed by which people try and keep hold of the attention of others. And this can almost lead to an escalation dynamic as people try harder and harder to get the attention of others. And it becomes harder for everyone to hold anyone's attention as a result. The most obvious example of this is the frequency, for instance, with which people tweet. It's now, when I started using social media in a professional capacity, the frequency with which you needed to tweet in order to reliably accrue an audience seems to have increased over time. And I suggest the mechanism underlying this is this escalating necessity of activity to cut through the distraction. Not only do you need to shout loudly sometimes, you also need to shout frequently. And I worry that the volume and frequency with which you have to shout might be increasing. And if we're thinking about why an audience will be interested in our research, what I've said so far can seem really negative. And to take a slightly more positive tack to it, could you help the people you're engaging with understand something that matters to them better through the application of expert knowledge? Could your work be useful to them to understand themselves, understand their life, understand the problems they face? Could participating in a project of yours help them resolve some issue? Could it be something that matters to them? Would it be useful to them? And of all the issues that I'm raising, this is the one that's going to vary most widely between audiences, so it's hard to speculate in the abstract. But I think it's going to be much easier to build an engagement strategy if you have a sense of exactly why this group that you've defined and located will be interested in what you're doing. And if you have that sense, then you can build a whole strategy around that awareness, or at least that speculation. And finally, most prosaically, what resources do you have? Academics are busy, and there's a burgeoning literature about the extent to which academics are becoming busier with time. And we should be realistic about how much time we have a week to spend on social media, even allowing for the possibility, as I've suggested, that once you get to grips with social media, it can save you time, at least on certain tasks. And there are various solutions we can use. One is scheduling software, which I'll come on to in more detail in a short while. But the other is to think about the existing material you're producing, because one of the things that can be a real challenge is finding things to share. And when you do workshops introducing people to things like Twitter, one of the most frequent questions is, what on earth would I tweet about? And the obvious answer is your research, but exactly what about your research? And you can think about your own activity as a resource that can be leveraged to be active on social media. Are you producing things in your everyday working life? To give some examples, when I've taught in the past, I've often shared my lecture notes as blog posts. When I give public talks, if I'm using slides, I put the slides online, and they're quite popular online. Various academics I know record their lectures to release as podcasts. If you're reading material, the very fact of writing long-form engagements with it can constitute a blog post in its own right. And this can make it sound very instrumental, and I think when it works, it's not quite a process that it is as means end as the one I just elucidated. But to be clear about the ways in which you are already doing things that people online would be interested in. You are already creating things that people in your networks might like to read. And it's just a case of getting to the habit of recognizing those things, identifying them when you've done them, and sharing them through your network, giving other people an opportunity to see them and engage with them. And to not underestimate the extent to which people are interested in your work, and to share aspects of that work with them. These kinds of byproducts you produce as a standard part of your scholarship could be of value to them. And people have different comfort levels about how much of this they want to do. The philosopher Daniel Little has a lovely phrase where he talks about the pleasure people the pleasure people take in seeing ideas in motion. And I think there's really something to this. There's something very exciting about the way in which social media can let you see the backstage. They can let you see all the scaffolding that goes into the production of books and articles. But not everyone wants to share everything about this backstage. So it's a case of working out what's comfortable for you. But to not see content creation as something, a vast additional activity you have to engage in. Some of this you're already doing, and it might be that you have to repurpose things a little bit. So if you're preparing lecture notes, it might take a little bit of time to make those notes suitable for publication on a blog. But these are useful resources you're creating. Another aspect to think about with resources is how much familiarity do you have with social media already? How much ability to identify relevant platforms for specific purposes? And so to watch, learn, explore, experiment can be effective here. Once you become familiar and once it becomes part of your routine, you start to get a sense of what you're interested in just through engaging, and the very fact of watching what other people are doing can be really valuable. If you see someone doing something that you find appealing, just take a moment to try and articulate what it is about it and see if it's something you want to do. Or if people are doing things you find problematic, then to take a second to identify what it is you find problematic about it. And familiarity in this sense is a resource. It's something that makes it quicker, it makes it easier, it allows you to habituate the use of social media. Another very different kind of resource is access to established online platforms. So things like existing blogs, institutional social media accounts, online magazines. If you have connections with people who run these things, these are important resources because effectively the people behind these initiatives have already identified an audience. They've already built up an audience over time. And by posting on their platforms, by sending them guest blogs, by writing articles for online magazines, by asking prominent Twitter feeds to tweet your material, they're giving you access to this audience, and this can be a very powerful resource, particularly when you can point people back to your own presence and almost piggyback on these existing audiences to help build yourself up online and connect with people who would be interested in what you're doing. And finally, an important part of this is to be clear about the digital footprint that you have. And it can feel very narcissistic, but to actually take a moment and Google your own name as an exact phrase and think about yourself from the perspective of someone who knows very little about you. Because if you have an extensive digital footprint that's clearly organized, this is something that makes it easier to build an audience online. But equally, if your digital footprint is split between multiple activities, has multiple points of focus, it could be confusing. It could make it harder for someone to understand where you're coming from online. And these are just some of the resource-based considerations that I'd like to suggest that it's worth thinking about at this stage. And this is an overview of the kind of points to consider when undertaking an engagement strategy. It's not set in stone by any means, but I think these are the different dimensions we need to think through. And I've used this for planning my own projects and found it quite effective, as well as using it as a tool in workshops. Just to run through this, and the more we can be clear about each of these different aspects of our audience, how to connect with them, why they'll be interested, and our resources, the easier it is to develop a sustainable engagement strategy. Something that we can take forward without it taking over our lives, while still retaining the capacity to actually focus on our core scholarly concerns. And ultimately, there are lots of methods and techniques you can use to enact a strategy like this. Far too many to cover in a presentation of this length. But in the rest of the talk, I wanted to introduce the two I see as most useful before moving on to some general issues. Firstly, social media scheduling software, and secondly, blog reader. One of the most effective tools you can use for engaging on social media is scheduling software. This is Buffer, which is the one I choose to use. Hootsuite is the most popular alternative. And this is something that can save a lot of time. It becomes possible to engage throughout the week without having to be present at a computer at all times. And when you use it effectively, it means social media can fade into the background. And you can have a regular output without being always on. The screenshot is from Buffer, and it allows you, much as Hootsuite does, to connect a number of social media feeds, define the times of day on which you want to post, and then populate the schedule with the posts you want to go out. And in essence, this leaves you with something that I think of as a pipeline of content. Effectively, what are you going to share with these audiences to fill the schedule of intended social media postings? And it's important to be realistic about what you can sustain here. It's better to tweet a couple of times a day and keep it going, rather than tweet 10 times a day for a week and run out of material. And this can be an enormously effective tool. It allows you to do an awful lot on social media without it becoming an ever-present concern, without this feeling of constant connectivity where the distraction of social media is always nagging at the edge of your psyche. And as much as I'm enthusiastic about this, there are two key practical points that I think it's important to be aware of. The first is a very mundane one, which is being careful with scheduling time-specific content. It's easy to adjust your schedule without noticing it and have something go out at the wrong time and or on the wrong day. Usually, this is nothing more than an announcement going out after the deadline is passed, or something of this sort. But it's possible it could be more embarrassing, and I've seen various examples, none of which in the academic sphere, when some really cringeworthy stuff has happened because someone has accidentally set a message to go off at a very inappropriate time. The other consideration is ensuring you respond to people who are messaging you. Because part of what makes social media scheduling software so powerful is that you can set it up and you can leave it running, but that can also be a problem. You can create the appearance of presence without the time and attention it would otherwise require. but it also means you can forget about it. And you might find that you're accumulating a lot of attention online through your activity, but people are trying to talk to you. And because you're not logging in, you're not noticing. And this can seem past a certain point to be rude and be very counterproductive. The very obvious way of doing this is to simply make a point of logging in regularly and ensuring that you're engaging above and beyond the use of the scheduling software itself. But another way of doing this, which I like, is to set up email alerts, for instance in Twitter, so that when someone messages you directly, you receive an email. And thus, if you get that kind of email, you know you have to log in and engage with them, but otherwise you can leave it running. And you can focus on using your scheduling software, for instance, 1, 2, 3 times a week, to really focus on it for half an hour at a time, and then be able to focus on other things the rest of the time. The other resource which I think is invaluable is a blog reader. And this is because of the sheer weight of resources that social media provides for us. The more engaged you become on social media, the more you're aware of everything that's out there. I'm aware that even on one of my research interests, I could spend all my time reading material I'm aware of online and still only read a fraction of it. And when we're in this constant position of information overload, there's a tendency that we could just retreat from it. And I think this is a real problem because there's a massive opportunity here to diversify the range of sources we engage with and access as academics. But to do this, we need carefully thought out use of tools that can help us manage this glut of information and content. And a blog reader is straightforwardly the one I found most useful for managing this information overload. For those unfamiliar with them, they're tools that allow you to identify blogs and websites you wish to keep track of. You simply add a website into the reader, and then it compiles all the new posts from these sources into a sequential list. You can organize these sources into themes. So the screenshot that I've taken is from a digital scholarship list I use, where I've collected my favorite websites and blogs about digital scholarship. And then whenever I want to read about digital scholarship, I go into the reader, and there's an enormous sequential list of the newest posts and newest articles on all these sites. And it ensures that I don't miss things, that I'm at least potentially aware of everything that's out there. And it allows me to go through it at a time of my own convenience. And it saves necessity of moving between all these sites, because ultimately we can only keep track of so many things at the same time. Without software like this, we fall into the habits of the same old sites that we read. And if used carefully, this can be such a powerful way of ensuring that we engage with a diversity of sources. So for instance, if you keep trying to keep track of a certain area or field, if you use a blog reader, simply finding 5 to 10 top sources within that field and aiming to read as much of this material as possible each week can be hugely effective. And it means that actually some things that would otherwise require an awful lot of attention and energy dispersed throughout the working week is something you could do effectively in just an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours that you set aside during your daily routines. And this can also be very effective in finding content to share with your social media followers. If you follow the right sources, it's surprisingly easy to find a lot of relevant material to share on social media in only an hour or two's reading each week. And the fact scheduling software is integrated into most readers makes it particularly easy to do this. Now, to move on to a couple of key issues that I think academics confronting social media need to find out about. The first is anger, aggression, hostility, harassment online. And to start on the benign end of the spectrum, it can be easy to be dragged in to debates online which are going nowhere. For some people, it can be exhilarating to have dialogues and debates with a diverse range of people from around the world. Sometimes, though, these debates can be a waste of time, and in others, they can help inflame a situation which can quite quickly turn into something very counterproductive and unpleasant. And for this reason, I wanted to stress that it's important to recognize when you should walk away from online discussions. This cartoon from XKCD is one of my favorites. It describes a feeling which I think many people have experienced around online discussion. I know I have a lot, and if you have this feeling, it's important that if you have the feeling that it's important someone on the internet realizes they are wrong, that's a very good moment for you to turn off the computer and walk away. And I think the verbosity of academics, the commitment to debate, is something that can sometimes go a bit wrong on social media. And to be aware of the kinds of dynamics this can give rise to, as people get into the kind of disputes that don't really serve a purpose that in everyday life might have been avoided. And I think this is one set of issues which is important to be aware of. But unfortunately, we are also seeing examples of behavior which is much more sinister than this needlessly aggressive propensity of academics and debaters online. And it's important to be aware at the outset that academics can be targeted online and that women and minority scholars are most likely to be targeted. The Pew Internet Research website I mentioned earlier has a lot of insightful but also dispiriting data on this topic. And I've been writing quite a bit on this in the last few months if anyone's interested. But for purposes of the talk today, the key question to start with is, do you work on a politicized and contentious topic? And if so, then unfortunately the reality of our contemporary social media is that you need to be very careful at the outset and be aware of the possibility you will be dragged into this kind of cesspool. One way of approaching this is simply to do some research prior to engagement about other people within your field, other people who work on these very politicized or contentious topics, and see what issues, if any, they've faced, see how people respond to them, and to try and adjust your engagement strategy accordingly. But unfortunately, the possibility of aggression and harassment online isn't confined to these instances. And these are issues which it's hard to do justice with in a talk like this because they're large, complex issues. And it's also hard to do justice to them simply because some of these issues will require much more action by social media platforms than we are currently seeing taking place. And at risk of sounding slightly vacuous, all I can really suggest practically is that you should remember that you don't owe someone a response simply because they message to you. You have the ability and the right to always ignore someone or follow them or block them. It might be that there's something even slight that makes you uncomfortable about what you've been asked. And I think if that's important to them, then they'll ask you again or find a more formal way to contact you. This sense of expectation online, this sense that we should always respond, that we shouldn't broadcast, it can often lead us to be, in a sense, overly responsive. And I think when there is such a culture of harassment brewing on some platforms, we should be very careful and possibly adopt a risk-averse strategy where rather than respond as default, we don't respond as default and we respond when we actually want to engage with the conversation in question. Because there are many occasions in which it's simply best not to engage, particularly given that these platforms are getting worse. These problems are getting worse on many platforms rather than better. And a related issue is how mobile internet can make it difficult to get away from these issues. Using internet on mobile devices can be a really useful way of filling unproductive time. I spend far too much of my life traveling on trains, and I gain something from what would otherwise be very boring experiences, because I use this time to do a lot of reading of blog posts and writing blog posts. They can also make it hard to get away from work. And if you're using social media as an academic through mobile devices, you should think about this from the outset and think about what's right with for you, what you're comfortable with. Some people find it helpful to avoid using social media on their phones because it helps avoid distraction. It helps give them a sense of getting away from work. Another possibility is using an anti-distraction app such as Freedom, which allows you to block certain sites for a defined period of time across your phone, tablet, and computer. Because one of the dangers of social media, in fact, in some senses the ultimate danger, is that there's the trap of constant connectivity. It's in the interest of social media companies to draw us into these platforms, to help us, encourage us to spend as much time and energy on there as we can, because ultimately they're monetizing our attention. The platforms may be free, but our attention is the product that they're selling to advertisers, to data mining companies. And for this reason, the architecture of the platforms has such subtle inducements for us to spend more and more time on there. And as academics, this can be quite dangerous, and something like Freedom as the app can be very useful. Rescue Time is another, which allows you to audit how you spend your time on your computer. Because this splitting of attention across a whole range of different engagements can make it harder to focus again on the core research activities and teaching that we're engaged in. And this is why I think it's important to flag these issues up from the start, because social media can prove a distraction as an academic, and you need to be careful to use social media and not be used by it. And the best way to do this is to be clear about these risks from the outset and about how you will approach them in order to engage in a sustainable way and integrate these activities into your working life. And finally, it's valuable to keep track of the data you have about your engagement. The screenshot in the slide from the left shows analytics that are available in the buffer scheduling software I mentioned earlier, and the right-hand side shows stats from the WordPress blogging platform. It can be very enticing to really delve deeply into this data, particularly after you've been engaging on social media in a sustained way for a while. But I think in some ways we should be cautious, because if you pursue ratings too narrowly, you'll soon be tempted to simplify your research in pursuit of a better response. This can be useful to a point. It can be valuable to adapt your mode of communication to the platform you're using to communicate. But equally, it can be a dangerous enticement, because actually if you're just pursuing attention on social media is based on the capacity to provoke a reaction. Your reaction might be driven by the intellectual quality of your argument, but when we look at actually existing social media, the kind of people who are able to really accumulate a lot of attention in this environment are often appealing to the worst, basest instincts of those around them. This is not an environment in which academic ideas are necessarily well equipped to win attention, as much as I remain an advocate for using social media for communication. And to avoid falling into this kind of temptation, it's important not to take the stats too seriously. And one way I'd suggest that you can approach this is to focus on extremes in your results, rather than poring through every item that you've engaged with online in order to see how people have responded to it. So for instance, if you're looking at blog posts, have any done particularly well? Have any done particularly badly? If you find that a particular post has been viewed a lot more than you expected, could you look on other social media platforms and see who shared it, and can you determine why they've shared it? If something you expected to be popular has proved to generate very little reaction, could you track the engagement, and could you see whether there's something about that post that explains why your expectations weren't met? And I found that looking at the more extreme results like this, the outliers, can be a useful way of learning more about your audience by tracking responses to material you've shared. It allows you to use the data that's available to you to optimize your use of social media without falling into the trap of just chasing Twitter followers, chasing blog views in a way that ultimately at best leads to BuzzFeed and at worst that suggests leads us to Breitbart. And so this is the end of my presentation today, and we've covered a lot of ground, and I've given a broad overview, which I hope has covered the key issues that you'd like to hear about today. And there's obviously lots more we can say. There's lots of resources on my website I've compiled over the years if you'd like to find more. And please feel free to tweet me or email me if you have questions after the event. I think we've got a little time for questions now, and I'll also be taking part in the closing discussion later on today.
Thank you very much, Mark. We are due for a break starting at 2:55 here Eastern Time. So we will go ahead and take a break now until 3:25 Eastern. And we look forward to answering some more of the questions during the discussion session. I know there's been a lot of chat going on during your session, and we appreciate that. So hopefully we'll have some time to address some of those comments and questions. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you after a short break.